Let me give you a minute's worth of background. Maybe, a year, 1 to 2, probably a couple of years ago, folks began asking about small groups, home fellowships, they called it by any number of names. We've settled on the name small group and about the possibility of having that. And no one at that time had stepped forward saying, I want to champion this. I want to be one who oversees it and launches it. Until about a year ago in Deacons meeting, we were kicking it around. And so a task force was formed from within the deacons and others. We reached out for others to at least be consulted. And books were studied, those who are expert in the field. And a few months ago, we decided we are moving forward with this and full speed ahead. And so Jordan and Jessica List have moved from being Awana commander and secretary to now being our key directors of small group. And we're about ready to launch in a month. And they're coming now with friends, family and friends to share. And these are part of the small group task force that we had. Come right this way, folks, and share with us what you have, and then we're going to have a Q&A at the end, and I'll be the roving reporter in the field because we do want to hear what your questions are, so that folks who are listening at home will be able to understand all that is said. Brother Jordan List.
Check, check, check. Okay, before we get started, we have to do something very important. Because I am familiar with the tech booth, I want to make sure we didn't get time to do a full sound check. So what's the label on your microphone there? IP20 and 19. IP19. So let's make sure those mics are live. Okay. All right. So first I want to start. Let's go ahead and put the first slide up. Yep. So before we jump into the details, Pastor already kind of gave a little high-level background of like why we're here and how we were formed, but yeah, just to recap that real quick, we have the working teams, the Staleys, and then, of course, my lovely wife, Jessica, have been the task force that have really been the driving force behind developing this ministry. And so, like Pastor said, Jess and I are kind of are leading this task force in terms of your point people for this ministry. And so, why small groups, right? Why are we doing this? What need are we filling? And I want to just touch on that real quick. This is the small group ministry really touches on the need for growth. And that's one of the reasons why most churches that have small groups, they call them growth groups, right? Because it's about growing relationally, growing spiritually, and growing in your education. And so it really addresses those needs better, we believe better than any other ministry, which is why we're using that as a vehicle to grow in those ways. Okay, so let's jump into the mission statement we have here. So this is just encapsulating what I was just talking about. So like there's a lot of different directions small group ministry programs can go, and so this is kind of our North Star, if you will, on this is going to be referred to when we answer a lot of the questions, right? To form and foster lifelong, close, biblical relationships with accountability among church members. So that's our why, right? That's our mission for ministry here at Redbridge. So what are the other goals of our ministry specifically? So the first one is going to be, couldn't remember if I had to click for that one or not. Accountability. Okay, so what do I mean by accountability? Okay, simply put, in a small group, you will be held accountable for showing up and participating in the group. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about what getting involved into a group looks like, but that's what we mean by accountability. Okay, and then secondly, we talk about, actually, I just mixed up those two icons. The first icon was supposed to be about close relationships. So let me talk about close relationships. So again, close relationship is what I mean in this context is we do really well here at Redbridge about fellowship, right? And that's just events where you can get together and you can talk and socialize and really fellowship. But unlike general fellowship, small groups is going to be a committed group, smaller in size, that is committed to growing closer in that relationship, which is going to be the foundation for that growth that we're talking about. And so that's what close relationship being one of the goals. So close relationship, accountability, and then, of course, growth. And so I talked a little bit a second ago about what that looks like, and so these are like the 3 goals that we hope to accomplish with this program. Okay, so that's a little bit of high level of how we got here and what it's all about. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what does it look like to get started in a small group when we launch, okay? So the first thing that's going to happen is sometime between now and launch, or between now and a year from now. So one of our goals is going to have everyone will be invited, personally invited by a leader, okay? So we're going to be putting a lot of time and working very hard on making sure that every leader that we have appointed, we're going to work with them to make sure that as many people get invited to a group as possible in our first year of the program. It's going to be our goal to make sure every member gets invited, okay? And then what you can also expect, or another part of getting started, is when the first night you show up, you are expected to be there every day for a year. I'm just kidding. That is not the degree of commitment. So one thing that's very important to us is making sure that you have a positive experience getting in the right group. Emphasis on the right group, not just any group, right? Because people are messy. There's a lot of dynamics with personalities and whatnot, and so we want to make that easy to find the right group. And the way we're going to do that is with giving you a 3-week trial, basically. So you can visit a group for 3 weeks before deciding whether or not that's going to be the group you want to commit to. And we'll talk a little bit in a moment about what that commitment actually looks like. But that's how you're going to be invited. You can try it out for 3 weeks before you make a commitment. So that's what getting started in a group is going to look like, okay? And so now let's talk a little bit more about the schedule, or when the groups meet, okay? So a lot of churches do this differently. The way we're going to do this is we're going to have 3 semesters, okay? And the first one starting on September 11th, and then we're going to break for the Christmas, New Year holidays, and then we're going to jump back in the beginning of January. We're going to break again for spring break in March, and we'll actually have the dates right here. There we go. So these are the 3 semesters, right? So we're going to break for the holidays, then we're going to break for spring, and then we're going to have a summer break. So off for the summer as well. And so that's a good launching pad to talk a little bit more about. I mentioned earlier this on-ramp, okay? So an on-ramp and an off-ramp, right? These are 2 very important components of our strategy for getting you in the right group. Okay, so on-ramp is that 3-week trial, so that way you can get into the right group. The off-ramp is where these semesters come into play, right? So the question a lot of people have is, okay, so I get in a group, I commit after 3 weeks, but then 4 weeks in, I discover that, this isn't the right group for whatever reason. Am I stuck in that group for a year? And so that's where these semesters come in, because at the end of each semester is a natural point where you can off-ramp from that group and try another group if you need to, for whatever, or just take a break from groups, right? And so that's going to be the way where we can kind of balance that accountability, but also giving you a degree of flexibility to move around to find the right group, okay? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we can expect from leaders, okay? So I really like this analogy that one author used about thinking of a leader as a gardener, right? So a gardener doesn't create the plants, doesn't create the life. He's just responsible for taking care of the garden, keeping the weeds out, nurturing it so that it grows and bears fruit, right? And that's really encapsulates the idea behind what to expect from a leader, okay? And so getting into the details of what we can expect from a leader, like I said earlier, you're going to get an invite. So everyone can expect to have a personal invite, possibly multiple invites from a leader, okay? And secondly, the leader is going to be responsible for choosing a host in their group. We're going to talk a little bit more about hosts in a minute, but leading a group and hosting a group are going to be two separate responsibilities within the group, okay? And then they will also be responsible for guiding and facilitating the conversation, right? Someone being in charge of making sure we stick to the agenda, more or less, and that we study what we're supposed to study, and you get the idea, okay? And then they are also going to be responsible for putting together your individual group's covenant. And so what I mean by that is every group is going to have a covenant. It's just going to be very high-level one-pager. We meet on this date. We meet for this long. We're committing to be consistent, so on and so forth. And so the idea there is after your 3-week trial, you sign the covenant to help as part of that accountability mechanism. So that way the group can hold you accountable to what you formally agreed to. Okay, so they're going to be responsible for overseeing the development of that for your group specifically. And of course, they're going to be responsible for the overall spiritual and relational climate of the group. So just very much like, a spiritual leader, for lack of better words. So, and finally, they're going to be responsible for overseeing childcare logistics, right? So that's a big topic. And so just to clarify, they're not going to be responsible for watching the children. They're going to be responsible just for making sure that the logistics are addressed so that everyone is able to participate, okay? All right, so what can we expect from hosts? Let's talk a little bit about that. So the host is not necessarily the same person, first of all. They don't have to be the same person. You can come up with a rotation in your group if that's what works for you. That's part of each group's autonomy, right? Whether you have the same person or rotating, the only thing that we really ask is that the leader not be the host, because that puts all of the responsibility on that leader or that couple, which could create burnout, could be overwhelming. So we're very intentional about the host being a separate person, okay? So the host is going to be responsible for not just necessarily hosting in their home, but just taking ownership of that logistic. Whether they meet at the church, whether they go out somewhere, whether we have a meal or we just have refreshments. You know, I suggest probably more than ice water, but hey, if that's what works for your group. We'll talk a little bit in a moment why that's important. But they will be responsible for that. And they will also be responsible for, well, I actually just answered this, specifically where to meet. So just organizing all of that. Okay, so what can you expect from the members themselves, the members of these groups? Okay, it's really straightforward. The baseline, the bare minimum expectation of each member, hosts and leaders included, is regular attendance, first of all, because the thing that really sets this apart, again, from your typical program, right, within a church is that accountability, right, holding everyone accountable to actually come, but not just come consistently, come on time, right, because for everyone who is late, that's very disrespectful to everyone else in the group. It could be awkward if you're sharing something very personal and then someone walks in halfway through and like, all right, catch me up, what's going on? That's not necessarily respectful, so that's where that accountability comes in. So regular attendance and prompt attendance is definitely going to be a responsibility of all group members. And then, of course, signing the covenant. So I talked about a moment ago how the leader is going to perform that, and then every member will be expected to sign that. Now, of course, we can talk more later about the details of what that might look like for each group, but just to give you a high-level idea of what you can expect from a member. Okay, and then finally, before we jump into the actual questions, I really want to stop to emphasize what the essential elements of each group. Okay, so I got to give credit to Jess. She came up with a great analogy I really liked here. And so if you think of, if you're a group leader and you're expected to develop your group and all the details, think of it as we're giving you that big flat green Lego base piece and a bucket of Legos, right? And all we're saying, you get to build this however you want, complete autonomy, but there are 3 essential Lego pieces that you have to use in your construction, okay? 3 essentials, okay? And those essentials are, first and foremost, time, okay? What do I mean by time exactly? I mean the amount of time, which specifically translates to meeting every week. A common question we get is, do I have to meet weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, whatever? Because here's the thing, if we're going back to the mission statement, the mission is that close relationship, right? And close relationship is built on trust. And trust is, and the number one ingredient for building trust is time. You're just not going to trust someone on that close level until you spend more time with them. So that's why the weekly meeting is so important. And that's also why we're expecting that you meet for at least 2 hours when you do meet. Again, each group may have a different time schedule. If you're meeting up at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, then maybe you have more time. But the point is, the amount of time you get together and you commit to each other is the most essential building block. Okay? And then second, like I mentioned earlier, is refreshments. Now, the reason I put refreshments instead of a meal is because, again, the logistics are going to look different for every group. Maybe you want to just have refreshments after dinner. Maybe you want to have a meal. Maybe just, my point is that can be unique to your group, but we highly encourage it because, as we all know, fellowship over a meal is so much better. You could just think of food as a stimulus to good fellowship and good conversation. It's a good launching pad, right, to have those refreshments and then dive into the study, dive into sharing whatever you're going to do for that night. And if you don't believe me, come join us in the pavilion afterwards. All right. And then thirdly is the study element. So again, I really like how one author put it, going back to that gardener analogy, to really nurture these plants, you put fertilizer, water, sunlight, all the things that make it grow. And so going back to here, it's like the things that are important for a group to really succeed and really grow well and bear fruit is time, grace, and accountability. And so that's why, or not accountability, but truth. Truth is what I was looking for. And so truth is synonymous with study. So what do we mean by study? Another question that comes up is like, what curriculum are we going to do? We're going to do what's called sermon-based small groups. And so what that's going to look like is during those semesters that I talked about a minute ago, each week that for the AM service, possibly the PM service, Pastor and I still need to work out details on that, but there's going to be a worksheet that asks questions based on the message for that weekend. Okay, and the reason this is so important is twofold. Number one, nobody has any homework. You just show up on the weekend service. I have homework. Yeah, Pastor has homework. So one exception, Pastor's got all the homework. So we just have to show up and listen. But knowing that we're going to study that sermon and ask questions will not only foster that deeper engagement, with the actual sermon, but it doesn't require any homework. Of course, it's encouraged, but it's not required. And that's one thing that makes small or sermon-based small groups exceptionally exciting. I think I covered everything that I was going to cover. Okay, so we are going to jump into questions. And this is my favorite part because Pastor's going to run all over the place with the microphone. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of microphone arrangement here. Well, we don't need one because I'm just using this mic. So you can just set it that way down. Okay. All right, so Pastor, you got your wireless mic ready to go? That we're just diving into questions, show us if I, hopefully, I addressed everything you could possibly think of in this little presentation.
And I've received a text message. Typically, I don't look at that sort of thing, but it rang in my pocket. Can those listening and watching at home or at other places send in a question so we very well may receive
that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So Chauncey, the Chauncey that's running the stream, if you pull up Facebook on your other monitor, you can watch for those questions.
Yeah, or they may even text me. Who has something to ask? Okay, let's see. That's interesting. This is embarrassing. The first question comes from the First Lady.
Sorry.
And your name is?
Contrary to what people think, I really don't know everything going on in the church. I really don't. I'm a very busy person, so this is all news to me as well.
Sorry, if I could interrupt real quick. Chauncey on the soundboard, could we get some feedback on these speakers because we cannot hear what's being said?
Oh, I'm glad they didn't hear what I said about that.
There we
honey.
go. Perfect.
I have a question about the onboarding process. So there's 3 semesters. I guess I have a couple questions about it. There's 3 semesters. So my first question is, can you stay with your same group all 3 semesters, or if you're supposed to? But the second question I have is, with the onboarding, the 3 weeks that you have to onboard, can you go through the 3 weeks, like how many times before you choose a group? So let's say I go to group A for 3 weeks, I'm like, I'm not really sure. I go to group B for 3 weeks, I'm not really sure. Go to group C for 3 weeks, maybe this is it. That's 9 weeks of the 12. Can you just explain the onboarding a little bit more?
Yeah, so there are 2 questions just to summarize. The first question you asked is, after a semester, can you or should you stay with that same group? I'll let Michael take that question. And then the question about what do you do who's someone who spends 9 months trialing every group, I'll address that one. But about can you stay in the semester, or do you have to?
Okay, so the whole intention here, again, going back to our mission statement, is the long-term relationships, biblical relationships. So the idea of a group is that that group remains together basically forever. So it's not something that we're encouraging people to switch in and out. Now, a group might keep on growing and at some point in time end up splitting into another group, but the idea is to build those long relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. And but going back to, we want to make sure everyone has a positive experience, which is why the off-ramp is important, even though the ultimate goal is to land in a lifelong relationship. So what do you do with someone who is jumping around? So what's going to happen is, this task force here, we are going to be highly communicative with each leader, okay, through regular, maybe ad hoc meetings. We might even visit groups, but the point is there's going to be a high level of communication between us and each leader, okay? And so we will be able to identify if someone is jumping around a lot. And so we can then have a conversation with that about the leaders and be like, Chauncey is just having a real hard time finding a group because nobody knows what his face looks like, And so we can have that conversation about and address that specifically. Go ahead.
Okay, so just so I understand, thank you, just so I understand more clearly, the 3-week onboarding, I love the flexibility, thanks for building that in. The 3-week onboarding is really meant to be for that first semester for the most part?
She's not going visiting, hopping around. We wanted to try that group for 3 weeks.
Yeah, are you asking, do they have to commit to that group after 3 weeks? I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
or see how there's like a second semester that starts?
Right. Oh, are you saying on the second semester, does the trial restart?
Do you have your on-ramp again on the second semester?
That's a great question. The answer, is no.
Okay.
It's because the whole point of the trial
Yeah.
is to determine whether or not this can be a good group for you.
Got it.
So if you know it's not a good group, you're going to know at the end of the semester, and so there's no point in having a trial at the next semester.
Got it.
Does that,
okay.
if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And what's more, if I may, the new assistant pastor will have the role of staff liaison over this area of ministry, and so there will be staff, there will be pastoral involvement. And Jordan, you all are not willy-nilly just saying, okay, this person in this group, this person. There's actually, might you speak a little bit to how we're going to know, or the technique, if you will, of a person going to this group or going to that group?
Yeah, I'll let Terry take that one. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. This question here is probably the most integral question.
It's pretty critical.
It's pretty critical. And so how we're viewing it, how we're treating this as natural relationships to start. Okay, so the leaders are going to come. We've these past several weeks we've met with potential leader candidates, and so we're waiting to hear back on who is going to accept that. And then once we have our leaders in place, sometime in the third week of August or so, we're looking to meet as leaders, and we're all going to be coming with a list of candidates that we would consider having on our small group teams. Okay. At the same time, though, we're going to have the entire church body kind of out. You kind of look at this as a draft. I hate to use that secular term there, but we'll have everybody kind of laid out. We'll have all the names available on who we eventually need over this next year to get in a small group. But really, it's going to start with natural relationships. If I, just for me in particular, because I'm going to be one of the small group leaders, where I sit, the friends I have, the close relationships I already have is a great place to start. And so that's where we're going to start, and then we're going to look at it and see, we're going to come with 5 to 7 couples in a group, and we may open up the groups to, let's pick somebody let's add somebody to our group that we don't even know. And let's see how that fits. And maybe that's where that 3-week, on-ramp comes into play. So anyway, it's not a perfect science. So our goal, again, is to have everybody invited within a year, assuming we have sufficient leaders, because we're only going to be dealing with 5 to 7 couples or units, as we call them, or singles within a group.
Good. Thank you. Martin, you had your hand up.
This question, sir, you will probably be able to answer. We're still going to have Sunday night service in here. Is that correct?
I
Pastor, I'll
don't
let
know.
you take that one.
I don't know what the future holds. I know who holds the future, but I don't know what did you say you wanted to take that?
No, I said you can go ahead and take that one.
Yeah, I mean, for the foreseeable future, we haven't made plans and all. I guess the answer will be how many units we end up having and what time frame they choose to meet. And so I guess if the whole church body is outfitted in a particular small group, tell me if this is a consistent answer with what you've presented, because I think it is, and the majority, if not all, of those opt for late Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, then I probably will not just be here alone. Although there is actually wisdom in me preaching to the internet,
Yep.
frankly. So there's no definitive answer, but there are not plans right now to do anything schedule-wise other than what we're doing. That's the best answer I know. You all are free to supplement.
Yeah,
on that.
Martin, to go further on that is we are not precluding groups from meeting on Sunday nights.
Yeah, and in fact, 2 years ago we said if you want to just have an ad hoc small group on a Sunday evening, you're free to do that. We said a couple of years ago. It wasn't in an organized, formatted way, but folks are free to do that. So
Pastor, we've even thrown, and you've heard us say this, we've thrown out the idea that we'd like to have Pastor and Kathy in a small group. So what does that look like? Don't know for sure yet. It just depends on what Sunday evening looks like here. Yeah. So we'll see.
we're just launching now,
Yeah.
and so the flesh will be added to the skeleton in the coming months. I'm not avoiding it. I don't know what it's going to look like ultimately. Someone else.
And while you're looking for someone, Michael, can you clarify what we mean when we say unit? Yeah.
Unit. It's a couple or single.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. A unit would be a couple or an individual. So let's say you're a single person, you're a part of a group, you're one unit. If you're a couple, that's one unit also. Both of you together would make one unit.
I'm sorry, I misstated it. I thought you were referencing a unit as a small group unit. you're not referencing it, using it in that
We're calling
context.
it a small group.
Yeah, no,
It's a group.
that's why I wanted to clarify,
Yeah.
because when we say unit, we're just referring to the members, because that's relevant when determining how large the group should
Good.
be.
So for example, if a couple has 2 children, the children would be coming, most cases, to the meetings, however that's managed, but they're not considered part of that unit. It's just the couple, and the single individual would be
Okay.
a unit independently.
Yeah, thank you. Hannah?
Yes, I had a question about the joining the small group. So you mentioned that it would be by invitation at the beginning. As far as like, you know, if the first group didn't work out, how do you find another group? Is there going to be a list where they, you know, a person could pick someone to try, or is that then going to be invitation again? Or people that want to join here at the beginning but don't get invited to a group? You know, how does that work of joining with the invitation idea?
So just to summarize the question, you know, how do you get into a group if the first group didn't work out, or if you're new and didn't get an invite? Where do you go? How do you see what groups there are to join? You guys want to take that one?
I'll
gonna
take
take that one.
I'll take that one. I think, you know, again, Hannah, we're really trying to be studious or really committed to getting everybody involved that wants to be involved, and in the right group. Can we be perfect at that at our first shot at this? Likely not, but with time, hopefully that will allow us to find a better group. If that first group doesn't work out, then our task force will work with you to find you another group. Okay? We're not doing, I mean, churches do it differently. We're not doing a sign up or anything like that. We're just trying to create natural relationships. So we'll feel this out as we go. We want this to be good for everyone, not just a few. We've heard the term popularity contest mentioned several times. This is not what we're after. It's not, well, you want to be part of this group because this is the popular group or anything like that. We want a natural fit that you're going to enjoy being a part of.
Dave?
I know you've been spent time planning. I was involved with this type of setup for about 10 years. My concern from observing it in another church was concern for the children. The children that are involved, the care of them, and the type of material that they were being led in would be one concern. And the other question I have is, if the purpose is to grow relationships, and we start with people we already know that we feel comfortable with, how is that growing? And also, can you invite, are you trying to use this as a way of growing the church and bringing in outsiders, or is this just people that are members of the church? You have to be a member of the church to be a part of a group.
Wow, great questions. I want to break it down a little bit. So the first concern you had was about the children's involvement. I'll take that one. And then you asked about if the goal is close relationship, then how are we achieving that with... Okay. And then lastly, the question is, what part does this play in basically outreach? You know, can other people apart from actual church members be involved? And Michael, you can take that one. So I'll answer the child care one first. And so the simple answer is this is not meant to be an alternative to a children's program. Okay, plain and simple. However, one of the best things I believe that you can do for your children is to set a biblical example of what biblical relationship looks like, and consistently getting into God's word and communing with the church body and setting an example in that way. So although it's not supposed to be a children's program, you can still benefit them in that way. And then as far as making sure they're just taken care of during the meeting, that is a big logistic problem with just fellowship and getting together in general. And small groups is no silver bullet to solving that problem, which is why we believe it's so important for each group to have their own autonomy with deciding how that's going to work. Just a few quick examples, some groups have it to where they all pool in to pay a babysitter, maybe someone from the church even, to watch the kids, and wherever we meet, if they have a basement large enough, they just hang out down there. Another example would be that, the guys watch the kids and the women get together one week and then they alternate, taking turns, There's just a lot of different ways that you can do that, and we are happy to work with each leader to really figure out the best way to take care of that for each individual group. So what was
So an example of that, some of you guys were around when we had growing kids. So Beth and I facilitated a growing kids group probably 3 different times, and these are 26-week programs. And so what we found is that, obviously we had the couples, they would come over to our house, and you want to talk about building deeper relationships when you're meeting with an assortment of other, at that time for us it was young couples, young parents, and we had such a good time growing together. We got into God's Word, we watched the material, we discussed the material, we ate food, and sometimes we had to actually move people out of our home at 1:30 in the morning because what we saw there was such a need for fellowship and building relationships. So Day, to answer that other question you had, well, if you're going to invite people you already have relationships with, what's the point? The point is there's not a lot of deep relationships, that like we experienced through Growing Kids after spending 26 weeks together, where you're praying with one another, where you're praying over one another's kids, and where you're getting to know these people, praying over their needs, their struggles, because that's what we started with parenting, but we spent a lot of time on parenting because we all had difficulties in certain areas of parenting. And so we really got to know and come alongside one another because some had older kids, some had younger kids. And so it was such a blessing. But what I'm saying here with the developing deeper relationships, even though I sit over here and I have relationships with people around there, I don't have deep relationships with them. We talk superficially on Sunday. How deep do you get in your relationships with people here on Sunday morning, Sunday night, or out at the fellowships even? You're spending a lot of time just talking about the 5 o'clock news or what's going on kind of thing. And so building relations, I'm looking forward to it because all my associations with people here, I'm looking to go at a different level with them through this ministry.
Good.
And I just want to just tack on one extra thing on the close relationship thing. Honestly, that's going back to what Terry said earlier about forming the groups, finding those existing relationships. If that's already happening organically with group, fantastic. That's great. This is then in those cases where you have a more mature group, you're going back to like the 3 essentials of the group, right? Time, study, and why do I keep forgetting the refreshments? The most important thing. No, but you're going to find in the more mature groups that maybe you spend less time, sharing and more time studying, right? Maybe you have another program you're going through in addition to the sermon worksheet, so it's going to that balance is going to look a little different depending on the maturity of the group.
So one other thing about the kids that Beth reminded me of here, the important thing when we went through that Growing Kids for 26 weeks is the kids didn't come, and the parents loved that. It was a date night for the couple because we grew relationally and spiritually through those Friday night meetings, okay? They had a babysitter, their parents watched them, however they worked it out. But we did not have all the kids with us, which made it super productive.
Michael, do you answer your partner because I have some text questions that have come in.
Okay, so about outreach. One of the things is, and again, piggybacking on what they've talked about already, has to do with the relationships. And, you know, I feel like I've been here a number of years at Redbridge, and I have great friends here, and I think we have great relationships, but it's very superficial, like Terry said. You know, it doesn't go to that next level. I grew up overseas as a missionary kid, and there overseas in most countries, they're a lot more relationship oriented than what we are in the U.S. We're still very segregated. We come to a church, you know, we sit in our pews, we listen to the message, and then we leave or whatever. So building it right now, these small groups and these relationships is extremely important. It's very important to me. Can it become an outreach? Yes, I think it can be. And in some cases, some of the churches, and we did a lot of research, have grown into becoming more of an outreach program. But it's not about numbers. It's not about growing the church. It's about growing healthy relationships within the church. And that a byproduct could be the church is healthier, because guess what? Someone's visiting the church, they've been here for 6 months, and they're kind of sitting there and they're not engaged with anything. They become a part of a small group and they might stay around a little bit longer. Yeah. So that might be a byproduct of it. But yeah, it can eventually become an outreach, and we will be able to invite people and try to grow it that way. We want to do it, but in the beginning, I think we have to build it so that we can get to that level.
Okay, those in a group, in a small group, what's the minimum age to be considered a unit? Say, for instance, if it's a family, husband, wife, but they have adult children, do the adult children not count as like a 25-year-old unmarried daughter living in the home? Is that daughter a unit and she can go to a small group, or does she flock with her parents?
No, that's a fantastic question. So the answer is pretty simple, actually. It's that group's decision. You know, there's, in the research I've done and in the experience I've had, wisdom would say the dynamic between that child and her parents being in the same group may not be the best situation for her to, you know, grow in those ways. But maybe not, you know, and that's why it's like, that's just one of those things that if the parents of those children really want them to be involved, you know, there's nothing biblically saying that can't happen.
So no hard line.
Yeah, it's no hard line. You just got to go back to the mission statement.
A lot of small group autonomy is what I'm hearing coming from you all.
Think of the bucket of Legos, right?
Yeah, and another question that came in, is the small group experience to be in place in lieu of or an enhancement to what is already going on here at Redbridge? In other words, will it replace activities or ministries in which we currently engage?
I can take it. Okay, so that is another good question, and the simple answer is we do not have an agenda starting this ministry to replace anything. It is not meant to replace anything. It is meant to be something new and meant to be something primary. Okay, because we believe as the task force that this close biblical relationship and accountability is an essential aspect of the church life, and therefore, you know, we would love to see that this is the most attended ministry apart from morning services. Mm-hmm. Now, like you said earlier, if you're standing up here alone on Sunday evening because everyone's in a small group, then
I'm not complaining about that.
Then retiring that ministry may be a result of small groups being successful, but that was never the agenda of small groups.
The goal is church health. Right. I'm not interested in church growth in numbers. Right. I'm for the sake of that, I'm interested in church health, that we are healthy. The body is healthy. The liver is working, the kneecap is working, the ankle, on and on. That it's every part is healthy. Brother Saylor had something.
It was basically Day asked my question, but clarification on that. When somebody joins the church, they're going to be assigned a group.
I'll take.
Is that what's?
Yeah, ideally, presuming we have sufficient leaders, even when we build out our initial teams, we may factor in some growth opportunities so that as new couples join, but we also want to make sure that our current membership is invited as well. So we're going to work really hard as a task force to make sure that new families are engaged as soon as possible. But not to the neglect of anybody else, though, that would choose to be in it.
And maybe they haven't joined, but a person or a family starts coming, and then they're consistent for how long before we start identifying?
Exactly 3 weeks. No, I'm just kidding. No.
There's research on that. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm wondering, if how do we identify where they're going to go?
Mark, the whole goal of this is to create what this material that we've been studying through for a while is called the sticky church. And so to be a sticky church, you're developing and fostering relationships. So we want to get people involved in these small groups as soon as possible. But we also have to be practical. We're limited to the leadership that we have.
Fundamentally, God has made us relational creatures. And of course, that's the case naturally. Lost people get married. Lost people have children. Lost people have friends over for the ball game, on and on. But in addition to that, spiritually, we are members one of another. And the way to develop a relational health, one of the major components, the essential, is shared time together. And if that is avoided or neglected or not available, then ergo, church health is affected. We could have been doing this all along, but for such a time as this, it very well could be that God will bless and blow the wind of engagement and revival on our hearts and on His body, and we will see great things. Any other questions? Yes, Susan. I'm running because Susan's a runner.
Have you given thought to those that are not capable of driving?
I'll take that one. So I'll actually use that question to touch on really what it's closely connected to, and that's just a question we often get where for some reason, whether it be health-related, job-related, or even geographically speaking, there are going to be challenges for particular members to be consistent with a group, okay? And the answer to that is the same as it would be when you get hired for a new job and you are planning to take 2 weeks off. Do you tell your boss the day of, oh, by the way, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks? No, you tell them up front. You set that expectation on the front end so that your group can work out logistics for that specific situation, whatever that challenge is.
More of those that are not the elderly.
Yeah, so I mean, if transportation is a challenge.
They have a ride to church right now that somebody would be willing to pick them up in their group, or people, if they're at night, they don't drive at night. So
you answered your own question, Susan. Because that's going to be inherent in a group to address the ministry needs within that group.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So I mean, the answer is basically there are going to be challenges like that in every group. Some are going to be more difficult to solve. Like plainly said, I don't have a solution off the top of my head for that unique circumstance. But I'm not going to have the solution for a lot of unique circumstances. The point is that we're just going to have to take this one step at a time and work through each challenge. Yeah.
We're getting close to out of time, but I didn't want to neglect if you already had a thought or a question in mind. And we always have to make way for our chairman of deacons.
Okay. So as we kind of see you know, Sunday nights are less attended than Sunday mornings. And so those folks who are maybe just on the periphery of church life, they come Sunday mornings, maybe once a month, twice a month, but they're still members. Do you plan to incorporate those who are not as committed to church life in these small group settings in hopes that their health will be extended or grown, and then you know, it just touches all points of church life with them?
So that's a great question, Chuck. So the question is, you know, people who are presently and visibly not as committed to church but are technically a member, are they going to be prioritized, you know, as well? And the simple answer is, yes, we're going to try to invite a member whether they show up regularly or not. The commitment, the covenant, is showing up consistently to the group, right? So regardless of what they're doing for Sunday morning attendance, the commitment to the group is that they show up every week, and we believe that that will be the grounds to which they will mature and grow and become more committed through that group, and therefore a byproduct could be better attendance through that. But it's really not about where they stand currently and more about whether they're going to commit to the group or not.
You know, what flashed in my mind when you all started off by saying accountability, I think of accountability not in a negative. It seems to have a negative connotation. I like this. I'm counting on you. You are counting on me. Isn't that accountability? Yes. We're saying openly, willingly, intentionally, we're counting on each other to be a part of each other's lives. Well, that takes care of accountability. If I'm truly counting on you, I really am. I'm counting on Kathy giving me a great meal every evening. Because you people know I can't cook for myself. And she does it. And she's counting on me to gobble it up and be grateful. And 100% of the time, I am. So we count on each other.
So Chuck, real quick, Chuck, adding on to that question of yours, is that person that might not be that regular might be needing a small group ministry to become more engaged with the church. So yes, we would like to reach out to them also.
Not a question, but I wanted to go back to Susan. I think, if I'm right, guys and ladies, the small group being autonomous, you're worried about some of the older people maybe not being able to drive at night and such. But see, the whole idea is that they can meet anytime they want to. So if they meet, if they want to meet for lunch on Tuesdays, and that's the day, the time of 2-hour period, so they don't have to worry about driving at night. Okay.
Good point.
Thank you.
Pastor, I know we're past time, so if just close us in prayer whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Cut it off.
Any final things that if you don't ask, the rocks themselves will cry out? And I have to get to this hand not because he's Chris or because he's a deacon, because he's the father of my grandsons.
I'll try not to cough. What does a small group ministry look like successfully? What does it mean to be successful?
I'm going to go back to what Terry said earlier about this one book called Sticky Church. And in the context of that book, the sticky basically just means that all of its members are more sticky. It's going to take a lot more for them to even think about ever leaving or not attending regularly. So the result, the metric for success, is just a more tightly knit body of members and a higher degree of commitment and being more sticky, right? To where, from a leadership standpoint, you could even just say, the one analogy that's used is the back door being shut. So everyone who comes stays. We're not growing numbers isn't the goal, but it is a measurement of how successful small groups are because less people are leaving. Go ahead.
All right.
Chris, was your question more along the lines of what does a successful small group look like, or a small group ministry? Gotcha. Okay.
Did that answer it?
Yes.
I trust. Okay. One follow-up question, And we're done now with text messages because we're about ready to close with Larry's thought or question is, have we given any thought or consideration to a virtual small group for maybe some of the reasons that Susan suggested, or maybe outlying areas, or people who, for whatever reason, anything like that, that literally, there would be a small group which is specifically for folks who are virtual?
So I'll answer that real quick, and then for anyone else who has a question, I'll be at the pavilion afterwards, and you can talk with us there as well. So the answer to that is it depends on the group. Again, it's the autonomy of the group. Like if there's a particular sum of people in the body that for whatever reason have logistics that make that the only viable option, then absolutely that could be a group that
could be a possibility.
That could, either every other week or just exclusively meet virtually. Obviously, video doesn't capture all of the tones and body language as well, so it's not ideal. But if that's their only option, then absolutely that works for them.
Thank you. Larry?
Is there going to be any formal or informal reporting once these groups have met a few times so that they can let people know, here's what we're up to by now, here's what our goals are, and so forth?
Absolutely, and I mentioned earlier how this task force will be meeting with group leaders routinely, so we'll be in constant communication with them, and we're also talking about having surveys, at the end of each semester where people can submit feedback on, what any concerns they may have or whatnot. So we will definitely be prioritizing getting as much feedback as we can and overseeing.
And Pastor, your sister Melody had a question back there if you want to.
Oh, you would put me on the spot. I was hoping her hand was not going to be seen. I didn't see it. I really didn't. I did not see her hand.
I wanted to address Chris. We were involved, Fred and I, in small groups for a good 10 years prior to coming here, and it was phenomenal. It was different than this, but also similar. But we had pretty much full reign as a group. And what happened is phenomenal to this day, because one of our groups, there were 6 couples, and we raised kids together, and now we are helping raise grandkids together. And we almost put the pastor probably out of a job, because what also transpired is we don't have a lot of opportunities to disciple one another, it seems, and that happened in the groups because it doesn't take very long when we happen to have a meeting and somebody's in crisis. And so what do you do when that happens? You drop everything, and your fellowship group is dealing with a crisis. You don't call your pastor, you don't call whoever, you call your small group. And that gives me goosebumps, because to this day, that group of 6 couples, we still do that.
Thank you, one and all, and you all who texted in online, and task force and all, for all your hard work. You all will be out at the pavilion? Okay, they're going to be heading out there. Brother Saylor's coming to lead us in a dismissal hymn. We're going to stand. Glad that you were here. We're going right out to the pavilion. The food is ready. We're so thankful for our recreation committee who works so hard all the time. Thank you, audiovisual committee, for your good work this evening as well. And let's head out to the pavilion. Trust that this week the Lord will bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you, be gracious unto you always, and the Lord lift up his countenance upon you, give you his peace. Brother Saylor.